1 o'clock, so I think maybe we should get started. Welcome everyone to the second session of the Food Sovereignty Speaker Series. My name is Evie Ferreira. I'm a Humboldt State alum and a member of the HSU Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace Committee. This is the second speaker series hosted by the Humboldt State University Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace. And with your enthusiasm and support, the first of many speaker series. This speaker series will continue every Monday throughout November from 1 to 2:30 p.m., addressing a range of perspectives on Indigenous food sovereignty. Before we begin, we will acknowledge Humboldt State University's occupation of unceded Wiyot territory. This territory includes the Wiyot tribe, Bear River Rancheria, and Blue Lake Rancheria. HSU is located in Arcata, known as Godini, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. Wiyot peoples continue to remain in relationship to these lands through ceremony, culture, and stewardship. They are important parts in not only the history of this area, but also in the continuing knowledge of this place. As numerous Indigenous scholars have articulated, land acknowledgements are a beginning, not an end. For land acknowledgements to be meaningful, they need to be accompanied with action. Today, my call to action for all of you is to donate to the Humboldt State Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace. If you just refer to your chat box, Dr. Reed has put a link in there. The title of our presentation today is State of Indigenous Food Sovereignty in the United States with Dr. Devon Mihesuah. Devon Mihesuah is an enrolled citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma and is the Cora Lee Beers Prize Professor in the Humanities Program at the University of Kansas. A historian by training, she is the author of numerous award-winning nonfiction and fiction books, including Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens, Indigenous Recipes and Guide to Diet and Fitness, that won the Gorman International's Best Indigenous Book in the US and the Special Awards of the jury. And she's also written and co-edited Indigenous Food Sovereignty in the United States, Restoring Cultural Knowledge, Protecting Environments, and Regaining Health, co-edited with Elizabeth Hoover, that won the Austin Award of the Society of Economic Botany and Gorman's Best in the World Indigenous Book. She is a former editor of the American Indian Quarterly and the University of Nebraska Press book series, Contemporary Indigenous Issues. She oversees the American Indian Health and Diet Project at KU and the Facebook page Indigenous Eating. A short abstract to share with you. The Indigenous Food Sovereignty Movement, IFS, has exploded in recent years. The number of tribal and grassroots food initiatives, farms, ranches, community, and backyard gardens, food summits, chefs, school programs, and books and articles about Indigenous foods continue to proliferate. Despite these efforts, high rates of diabetes, obesity, and other maladies still remain, and food insecurity is a reality for many tribes. This presentation explores the meaning and goals of Indigenous food sovereignty, as well as the challenges we still face in achieving control over our food systems. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Mihesuah. If you have any questions for our speakers, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please enjoy the second session of the Food Sovereignty Speaker Series, and thank you all so much for coming.
Are you ready? Okay, halito, chamachukma. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and I hope everybody is doing well. So what I do have for you today is kind of an overview of Indigenous food sovereignty, you know, what it is and what is going on right this minute. And, you know, I had mentioned that in case something goes sideways, I do have my phone. So if I'm too loud or if I'm not loud enough, someone's going to let me know somehow. So we'll get started. I'm visual, and so I have PowerPoint. So let me share my screen, and then you shall hear my voice, but you'll see lots and lots of pictures. So let's see if I can do this. Here we go. All right. Indigenous food sovereignty. So I had thought about, just for grins, maybe I should call this something else food sovereignty. All right. If y'all are familiar with the something else, I'm getting ready to write something about that. Before I start talking about this, I want to bring your attention to a couple of things that I do. The American Indian Health and Diet Project. And there are a lot of resources on here. So if you're looking for, lists of indigenous foods, how to get started with the garden, some recipes, this is a resource that you might find helpful. And November the 22nd through the 28th is the 10th annual of Indigenous Eating. So if you go to my Facebook page, Indigenous Eating, during this time period, especially, you will see that I will have dishes and recipes of this hemisphere. And the whole idea is you're going to be challenged to eat only foods from your tribe for a whole week, or if that's not possible, just one traditional or pre-contact meal per day, or just choose from the whole hemisphere. So there's about 8,000 followers, and so this tends to be a real popular challenge. So hopefully y'all will tune in if this is the kind of thing that interests you. And as was mentioned, Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens was first written in 2005. And, years went by and I thought, boy, this thing really needs to be revised. So I did. I added about 190 pages. I corrected mistakes. I did all kinds of things to it. I doubled the recipes. And what a lot of people like about this book is that it has a long curriculum guide in the back. So if you're a teacher, you might find it useful. So Indigenous food sovereignty, why do we even worry about this? Why are we now in this incredible movement? And why is it growing day by day? Well, we've got a long list here, and I'll just mention a few of the reasons why. It's because of health problems that Native people are facing. As you know, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, cancers, a lack of access to culturally related foods, fresh foods. Sometimes people just don't have access to foods, right? There is a lack of knowledge about the significance of culturally related foods and how it is that they impact our societies and what they mean to us. There's an inability to garden, hunt, fish, or forage. Some people don't like healthy foods. There is wide-scale environmental destruction that I'll talk about later, global warming, poverty on many tribal lands, intra-tribal factionalism. We know about intertribal factionalism, that is, fighting between tribes, but there's plenty of that going on, within individual tribes. Loss of pollinators. Many people don't know how to write policy or to advocate. And there is punishment for protesters. Another underlying reason that we do need to address our food issues is that we've got this little fight going on, and that is food as necessity. We have to have food for our health, right? And for cultural connection. But we're also fighting with this idea of food is a commodity. So whenever you make food a commodity for sale, this leads to environmental destruction for farming and ranching, for treating cultural food as trends. We have additives in our foods, genetically modified foods, and there is competition for our resources. So who is involved in this movement? Well, here again is this very long list. Farmers, community gardeners, writers, chefs, cooks, fair activists, entomologists, people who are greatly concerned about protecting intellectual and cultural knowledge, our medicinal plants. All of you can come up with even more people, that should be on this list. There also are a growing number of food summits, seed-saving workshops, farming conferences, webinars, pop-ups. And the whole idea here is that we need to learn educate, inspire, empower, advocate, research, and network, right? So enough time has passed for us to see, what works, what does not, and what challenges are there that we have to address. And what are the results of all this work to date? Now, one reason that I brought up all of that, what I just said, is a lot of people are just now discovering this indigenous food sovereignty movement. They're very excited about it. They want to learn everything they can. They want to become a chef. They want to be a farmer. They want to be a gardener. They want to write a book. They want to teach about it. And I want to say that all of that is great, but you can only do so much. This is not just about planting a garden or chef's dishes, protesting, or us attending summits. Traveling is expensive. Food summits and conferences are often during the work week. Some tribes have no knowledgeable members to even educate about traditional foodways. And many of the summits that we travel to are culturally or environmentally specific. That is, I can give you an example. My tribe from the Southeast, Choctaw Nation, I went to a food summit at Gun Lake several years ago. Well, I really needed to go because I wanted to learn about the foodways in that particular area. But I'm not ever going to, harvest maple syrup. I'm probably not going to roast a beaver, and we don't have wild rice. So I just want to say from the outside that sometimes people get so excited, they want to get so involved, but they get quickly overwhelmed. So I want to make it clear that everybody is needed in this movement, but you don't want to wear yourself out trying to do more than you can. There is very heavy lifting involved. We have to deal with legislatures, argue in court, educating those who prefer junk food, writing policy, running for office. You have to learn to negotiate with the opposing factions in your tribe. So again, the food movement isn't just eating beautiful food and going to eat it or growing a little garden. That's the sexy part. This is the hard work part that a lot of people don't want to address, but we have to. And that is the state of indigenous food sovereignty. So again, some of us can only concentrate our energies on a few aspects of this movement. So if we take a look then, and this is another point that some people get stuck on, it's this term sovereignty. U.S. tribes, the United States says tribes are sovereign nations, but in reality, we are domestic dependent nations. That is not the same thing. If you are sovereign, that means you are autonomous and you are free from external control. And that is not at all the case with U.S. tribes. And those of you that are familiar with U.S. Indian policy, you know that at any time the U.S. government can step in and shut us down. It probably will not do that, but I can tell you there have been some real scares in the last 4 years. So this term sovereignty is a little bit problematic. Until we have complete control over lands and are independent from U.S. policies, we cannot truly achieve food sovereignty. But do we really have to be literal? I don't think so. Maybe tribal food traditionalism is a better phrase to use. There's another phrase that I think is kind of cool, and I write about this in Indigenous Food Sovereignty. Christina Schiavone proposes the term sovereign, and this means a state of continual planning, constructing, negotiating, debating, and protesting. So maybe we will always be in the process of trying to achieve food sovereignty without ever achieving it, but we can achieve a lot. And that may be actually quite good enough. So like the term American Indians, we use Indigenous food sovereignty to refer to something that we do recognize. A lot of people don't like the term American Indians, they don't like Native Americans, but if we consider that in US policy, in US documents, we are referred to as American Indians, we have to use it, but everybody knows what we mean when we say it. Keep in mind that this idea of Indigenous food sovereignty has been around as long as Indigenous peoples have existed. There has always been a need and a want to control our resources, our food production, and its distribution. We just never called it anything. We didn't call it Indigenous food sovereignty. But what does this mean? If we're going to use that term, semantics aside, tribal food sufficiency, sovereignty, involves a very complicated, complex mesh of social, political, religious, economic, and environmental concerns. We have to be culturally aware. We have to have trade networks and resources and cultural information. We need an understanding of treaty law. And this book, Indigenous Food Sovereignty in the United States, or we could call it something else, Food Sovereignty in the United States, this came out last year. And the reason I call attention to this is inside this book, Elizabeth Hoover and I came up with this graphic. And if you all were to study us and sit down as a group, probably could come up with many more things on here. But this is what we think are the four. My thing just says that I am fading. Is that true? Let me know if that is the case. These are the four big headings of food sovereignty. For example, under healthy environment, in order to have a healthy environment for Indigenous food sovereignty to succeed, we need pollinators, healthy soil, water protection, clean air, everything that you see up there in the upper right. Personal and grassroots to the left, and this could apply to everybody here that is watching and listening. This pertains to you. You need to have a desire for a lifestyle change. You need to be an activist. Be secure in your identity, have cultural pride, all of those things that make you a strong person and then make you an advocate for Indigenous food sovereignty. So again, if you have the book, you can go through and you can see, all of these various, little talking points. But again, there's probably many, many more. The point is, it's very, very complicated. Okay, it is not easy. There's just one or two aspects to having and achieving food sovereignty. So I'll just go through some of the things that I think are foundational. Treaties are honored. This means you have to have an understanding of treaty law, again. And in order to protect our land, to keep land, and to make decisions about what we're going to do with the land, our treaties must be honored. If our land is taken away, or if our environment is destroyed, if we don't have our water rights, our fishing rights, our hunting rights, then we are not going to be able to be self-sufficient. Do you know who your tribal attorneys are? Who is representing you at the tribal, state, and national level? Consider running for office. Make certain that tribal council members are informed and are accountable. This is what I mean by activism. You have to vote, not only at the national level, right, but also at your level. Some tribal council members really don't care too much about food sovereignty, but many, many are concerned. So you've got to make sure that you get those in there that really are. We need to have a reverence for land. Respect for the natural world instead of considering resources as commodities for monetary gain. Recognize the connection between healthy systems and the people. We need control over dams, mining, logging, grazing, and many other things. And so again, I have lots and lots of pictures. And so I like to think that they kind of make a point when I put them up here. These are all little creatures in my yard. We need to have respect for life. And, as we have seen again, recently at the national level, the policies that have been implemented haven't shown that at all. The smallest creatures, everything has a place. The spiders, the bees, the snakes, anytime I get snakes in my garden or, in there with the chickens, I just get them and I move them. Don't be squeamish, just, take care of them, right? I want to give you a good example of Sugarloaf Mountains in the Choctaw Nation. And my family, after removal in the 1830s, settled in Kulichaha, which is at the base of Sugarloaf Mountain. Again, this is in Oklahoma. And this is the 28th most prominent peak in the US at a whopping 2,560 feet. But in the mid-1800s, this is the important part, it was deemed an oasis of springs, game, plant foods. There was all kinds of animals and nut trees and fruits and pollinators. And it really was a destination. People wanted to come there, put your feet in the cold spring, And this is Sugarloaf Mountain today. And as time goes by and things change, but things really changed here with Sugarloaf. And so this is a good view in the cattle area, right? Cattle. And this is a cemetery where some of my family is buried. There are headstones going back there to the mid 1800s. Sugarloaf is way there in the background. If we look at Sugarloaf Mountain several years ago from Google Earth, you can see that it's kind of green, but also even further out, you see that is farmland or cattle land. And yes, here they are. And this is Sugarloaf today. I did a presentation about Sugarloaf and I wanted to get some current pictures about a year and a half ago, and I was absolutely dumbfounded at this picture because, well, voila, they have clear cut a lot of this area. And the problem here is that's not coming back. That just is not coming back. So Sugarloaf Mountain is kind of just one example of what we are seeing across the country, across the world, actually. If we take a look at what is going on in the Amazon, right, it may start looking like this. It already is. We need to have renewable structure and clean energy, wind, solar, water, geothermal power. And because the little guys there on the right are going to depend on it. And as many of you are aware of the pipelines that are crisscrossing or trying to, we see just how many there are. And when you see how many there are, you see what the potential is for disaster. Right? Fracking. And if you know anything about Oklahoma, Oklahoma has fracking absolutely everywhere. And fracking is the process of forcing liquid underground into the big rock to break the rock apart so that you can extract the oil. And sometimes in order to hurry the process, they use chemicals, and that hurries the process. So what happens is these chemicals then leach into the aquifers. It also makes the ground very unstable and causes earthquakes. So if you read up on fracking in Oklahoma, then you are aware of the hundreds upon hundreds of earthquakes that occur there every single year. And we live south of Lawrence, Kansas, Jayhawks, right? And it was several years ago that we had an earthquake, and the picture frames in our house shifted and things were jiggling. I thought, what in the heck just happened? And there was an earthquake not far from Oklahoma City, and it went all the way up where we live. And so now we have earthquake insurance, which nobody would ever in a million years think you'd have in Kansas. Most of the time you think it's tornado insurance, but yeah, fracking is quite dangerous. Again, we need to have the right to protest for clean water, air. And I don't know how many of you went to Standing Rock. And if you did, then you saw how many people were protesting. My husband Josh and I went to Standing Rock, and this was right before the tanks moved in. Because you can see behind me there on the left, Now, there are just a few teepees that are up, but not a whole lot of cars. But we left right as we saw these tanks start rolling down the road. I said, it's time to go, time to go. And so we left, and they were literally just. So, Standing Rock is very important, but Oklahoma also had protesters as well. The problem is that many states have instituted very harsh punishments for anybody who protests. In Oklahoma, it's a fine go on to the property of that is set to put in an oil well, $100,000 fine, 10 years in jail. And it's my understanding that South Dakota may have something similar. So I'm not sure how it is from state to state, but if you can't stand up and protest this, then we really are going to have more difficulties. We need to have the right to control our food production. We need to make sure that our tribal farmers and ranchers are supported. And really, they need to be supported by their tribes. You can't always expect the US government to bail you out or to support you. And if you do that, then you cannot be self-sufficient and you're not going to achieve indigenous food sovereignty. In the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma, my tribe, again, only half the farmers are tribal members. Yet our tribe is giving those farmers money, and those are the people who benefit. So we could spend a whole lot of time talking about the problems in the Choctaw Nation. This is just one of them. Tribes also need to follow their own strict edicts and regulations about food safety and conservation of plants and animals. So they are not answerable to state regulatory control. The catch is you have to really make sure that if you have a bison ranch, for example, that you really do have people who know how to inspect that meat and really do know how to make certain that those animals are healthy. So that is really up to the tribes to make certain that they do the right thing. But they do need to have the right to do this. And in many cases, they do not. We need to make sure that the elders' knowledge is utilized, from seed saving to gathering, basket making, tool making, fishing, ceremonies that are associated with sustenance, with planting, with harvesting, reverence for female deities. We don't have time to talk about this, but in many tribal cultures, it is the female deities who brought food to the tribes. And many people are just not aware of that at all. Many tribes are dependent on commodities. Now, some people do live within their tribal lands and they don't eat commodities because they can afford, to buy other foods. But there are plenty of people who this is their lifeline. And oftentimes the commodity choices they have are questionable at best. Or even if they do have healthy choices, they don't know how to make those healthy choices. So there needs to be education about what they should be choosing. And there also need to be advocates about these commodities to make certain that they do have really good foods available, because oftentimes they simply do not. Adequate grocery stores and markets. As some of y'all are probably aware of the term food deserts. Food deserts, what this means is, you live in an area where you do not have a store close to you, that sometimes you may have to drive 100, 200 miles away. This is true on the Navajo reservation. Some of these people live so far out there that it takes several hours to drive into a town, and then they do all their shopping, and then they just pile the stuff in. The problem with doing that is they depend on non-perishable items. So, your tomatoes and your lettuce and your greens aren't going to last that long. So tribes need to address this problem somehow so that food is more readily available to all tribal members. Your tribe, your nation needs to be economically sound. And there are vast economic differences, between tribes. And all members need to have access to jobs and to services. And once again, here's my tribe, give you an example. The Choctaw Nation was worth over $2 billion in 2018. This is a very wealthy tribe. they have so many initiatives, you can't even keep up with it. 5 counties in the Choctaw Nation are the poorest in the United States. They were given a promise zone by President Obama in 2014. And the idea was we're going to address this extreme, excruciating poverty. And as far as I know, this promise zone has just been left by the wayside. The tribe is really more interested in businesses than it is dealing with the issue that we see in the picture, which is a grandmother who's completely overwhelmed with taking care of her multitude of grandchildren because her grandkids just drop them off and leave. The Choctaw Nation takes great pride in building their hospitals and diabetes, outpatient centers and all that. But they never address the problem of why you have diabetes in the first place. They just keep building these places. That's not to say they aren't necessary, but we desperately need to have traditional care, and that traditional care includes eating properly and a return to your cultural way of activity and growing things. For those of you who might be interested in how it is that people profit from other people's poverty, I recommend Evicted by Matthew Desmond. This always seems an appropriate place to drop this in there. I don't know him, but it is a good book. We need to have an agreement on what is traditional food. And this picture kind of says it all. It's the Yellow Man Fry Bread food truck. So as you can see, there's every choice imaginable that you can put on your fry bread, including this deep fried Twinkie there at the bottom. I've never really seen a deep fried Twinkie with chocolate and sugar on top. I've just seen the fried Twinkie, but you can do anything with fry bread, right? And this disagreement as to what is not traditional, sometimes it might seem kind of silly, but if you are a die-hard fry bread fan and you make it and you eat it all the time, chances are you are going to have health problems. And in an article that I wrote several years ago, really about fry bread, the question is posed: what is your traditional food? Is it food that you like? Is it pre-contact foods? Or is it the foods preferred by your grandparents? Because I think times people, they don't think back much farther than what their grandparents fed them. And so to them, that is their traditional food. So there does need to be some education about that. And once again, on my tribal site, some traditional foods, here they are not, but it gives you an example of what we have. Persimmon cake, if you've had persimmons, you know how wonderful they are. But in this particular dish, you will have sugar and flour, and an egg. And then you got fried corn or a sweet potato with 2 cups of sugar and 1 added to it. So this sort of thing is not helping at all. Created this, actually what I have are buttons and bumper stickers and mugs. So this logo I have on my Indigenous eating page, and I've gotten into some real trouble with this. Maybe some of y'all have heard me say this before, but I had this on my bumper when I lived in Flagstaff, and I had people actually follow me and honk and wave me down and scream at me, telling me that fry bread is traditional. So, controversies. We also need to get it right about our food history. Our tribe, or our tribes, because some people are, of multi-tribes, our pre-contact food is a direct connection to our culture. And so knowledge of these traditional food ways is greatly empowering. How did we grow it, harvest it, fish, hunt, gather, prepare, save it? The cosmological stories associated with those foods. We need to make sure that we don't grab onto another tribe's food history and claim it as our own. And this is a perfect example. The 3 sisters, as y'all probably know, corn, squash, and beans, grown in a symbiotic way. That is the corn stalk with the pole bean growing up the corn stalk, and the squash with the large leaves shading the ground and adding nutrients to the ground. It's grown only in the Northeast. They were not grown anywhere else. Now, many tribes grew corn, squash, and beans. They just did not grow them in this fashion, and they did not call them the Three Sisters. So there's nothing wrong at all with growing the Three Sisters. This is what I have growing in my yard, but we didn't do it. We didn't grow it like that. So this is it's sort of like Turtle Island. You also hear that term Turtle Island to refer, to us. That also was only used in the Northeast. So there really isn't anything wrong with referring to it because we know what you mean, but it really is more empowering if you find your tribe's own terminology. That's the point here. We need to have access to traditional foods, and those are persimmons on the left. And for those of you who are familiar with persimmons, you know that kind of the worse they look, the better they taste. You need to harvest them after the first freeze. Right, those are black walnuts that I had drying outside. These are pawpaws, and I don't know how many of y'all, if you are from California, have ever had pawpaws because they are indigenous to the east part of the United States. They don't travel well. Their lifespan is about 3 days, and the best pawpaw is when it literally falls in your hand off the tree. And then if it's on the ground, you better eat it fast. And it's got a texture or taste kind of like a banana / mango. And so these are pawpaws that I am able to find, within walking distance of my house. And maybe some of y'all saw in the New York Times, there was a story about pawpaws. I was in there, and I talk about the little pawpaw trees that I raise. Here are some other things: pokeweed on the left, mulberries, and over on the right, those are wild onions and garlic. And it's always kind of funny, in spring, because I know exactly where my little patch of these plants are, and I grab them and I'm carrying them home 2 miles, and people drive by and they honk, they're like, what the heck is she carrying? What is she doing? So, but I do it every year. The problem is with my wild onions and wild garlic, a road grader came by this year and just buried most of them under, 5 to 10 feet of rubble. So I'm very worried that I'm gonna have to find a new patch someplace. So how do we get our traditional foods? So that's kind of a segue into this, because a lot of them are located on private property. If they're on public lands, there's competition. If you think about piñon nuts or mushrooms, there's a reason why people don't reveal where their mushroom patches are. It's because if you do, everybody's going to go and take them all. In California, some tribes are growing foods on their tribal lands or private lands for tribal use. You still have to monitor to make sure people don't go in and take it all. But I want to mention at this point Gerald Clark and his essay on California in Indigenous Food Sovereignty. If you haven't read that, you really want to, because he does discuss how important it is that all of these foods growing in California, tribal people need to have access to them. But if they are on private property, you can't very well go hop over the fence on Farmer Jones's land and take them. So it's much better if the tribe can do it themselves, and then you won't have that. But what happens if you can't eat your traditional foods? Not every tribe is an agricultural tribe, and the Comanche Nation, as well as some other Plains tribes, were not agriculturalists. They don't have any seeds to fall back on. Nobody's saving those things. So here we have an argument for gathering. On the right, the guy on the far right, that is Quanah Parker. And the man next to him on the dark horse is Mihesuah. That's my husband's great-grandfather. And Mihesuah is there, picture on the left, sitting, he's in the middle. Well, this picture here, it's easy to say, what in the world is going on? This is, you might snicker, but after the Comanches were confined to Fort Sill in the 1870s, It actually took another decade for the rest of the Comanches to have to settle there. They obviously no longer had access to getting on their horses and hunting bison. And they were dependent upon the foods that the government supplied them. And some of them started raising cattle. So what they started doing was periodically, and I think this was taken maybe in the 30s or 40s, they would get on their horses in full regalia and go out and kill a cow. Obviously, there's not much challenge in it, but the whole idea was it's sort of trying to regain the old ways. It's certainly not the same thing as thundering across the plains, you know, riding sideways on your horse, shooting from underneath its neck, right? But this is a very sad picture, and I think it really does reveal a lot about what happens when you do lose aspects of your culture. So switching gears, we do need to get kids outside in a variety of ways. Instead of being separated from the natural world, they need to play outside, keep a connection. Schools need to incorporate traditional eating into the curriculum. But that is my son, Tosh, by the way, and he is always well aware of when the camera is on him. So there he is, acting quite surprised at the zucchini that he found. And in this picture, it's educating kids about the outside. And then that's me on the left. I'm lecturing to the local junior high kids because I used to race sled dogs. And so I'm talking to them about a novel that I wrote about a survival story, Grand Canyon Rescue. And so I brought my sled and my lines and all of that with a slideshow. And these kids were really fascinated because they didn't know anything about mushing or sled dogs. And then over on the right again is in Flagstaff with my zucchinis. I had great luck in Flagstaff because we had no squash borers there. We have them here, and I don't have as good luck. The boys that are standing up in the middle, if you know who Wazia Tawin is, those are her sons. So children also need to have appreciation for small animals and animal life. This is Ari and Tosh again when they were very young. In the garden, the bottom left is Bee Day, B-E-E. We have the Monarch Watch here in Kansas. The Monarch Watch garden is on the West Campus. And so Chip Taylor, who runs that, had my kids come out and help so that, you know, he would show people, you know, how bees actually are kind of gentle, except when they're swarming. And so they have them crawling all over them. Get your kids active, you know, have them doing things. Again, this is Tosh being a ham. And the reason this is important with your kids is that they're going to remember these lessons when they're younger. So Tosh and Ari, as they got a little bit older, here she gets whacked in the face, I think, with some spinach. But Tosh is now 27, and he's over there on the right, and he knows how to cook, and he enjoys cooking. And so these are important lessons, and I promise you they won't forget them. So really switching gears, sorry, this is kind of jarring, but poaching is a huge problem on tribal land. And poachers really do a job on the animal population. But not only do they kill animals when they shouldn't be there, they also take plants that they shouldn't be taking. And there has to be some kind of mechanism where tribes can address this issue and make sure that their land is protected. We need to have the better ability to combat invasive species. And of course, invasive species are the things that were brought from the old world. Bradford pear there at the bottom, the zebra mussels, the wild parsnip. This guy is standing in front of wild parsnip. Have that in California, but if you see anything like that, don't get near it. Because if it gets on your skin or in your eye, it is much worse than poison ivy and oak. Cats outside are absolutely one of the worst things to the natural world. They are responsible for the eradication of tens of millions of songbirds and rabbits and frogs and toads and salamanders. Anything they can get their teeth on, they will kill. And up in the top left, in Oklahoma, they call them pigs or hogs. The wild boar actually is a combination between the domesticated pig brought by the colonists and the Spanish wild boar razorback. And these things have proliferated to the point where they are completely out of control in Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, many of the southern states, in Georgia. And some of these things get to be 700-800 pounds. And they reproduce like rats. It's amazing. Now, their piglets are very cute. But the problem is that the sows have 12, 15 at a time, and those little cuties grow up to be engines of destruction. They will tear up fence posts, and they will kill small animals. They will kill fawns. And so I don't think that you really even, in some places, you don't even need a license to kill them. You can just kill them because they want them gone. Pollinators. This is another category of animal that is absolutely crucial to be protected, because if we don't have pollinators, then our food plants are not going to, they're not going to replicate. This is the inside of my little greenhouse, and the reason I put this picture up here is because over on the right is a little wasp nest, and we coexist. You know, I go in and out, and, you know, every year I got wasps, and I've never been stung. Of course, I'm knocking wood. I'll find wood to knock on, but so far, so good. You know, there just really isn't any reason to go blasting, you know, every insect that you find. These are chrysalises of monarch butterflies, and I've gotten to where I bring in monarch butterflies because there's so few of them anymore, and they really are vulnerable to other insects like spiders and birds. This is interesting, and I'm hoping that maybe in California y'all might have something similar. The Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, or TAP, and that's Tosh again over there on the right. This is in combination with the Okies for Monarchs, and Chip Taylor, again, who runs the Monarch Watch at the University of Kansas, he started this initiative. And what it is all the tribes in Oklahoma are given big, beautiful greenhouses to grow pollinator plants. And they, in return, they have guaranteed that they will plant every year 20,000 pollinator plants in an attempt to not only bring back the monarchs, but also to bring back other pollinators. Because Oklahoma is on that skyway, I guess, of the migration of the monarchs when they go back to Mexico every year. And this has proven to be really quite successful. So I just wonder if y'all do anything like that, you know, in California. There also needs knowledge of how to hunt and the right to hunt. Treaty rights need to be honored. And I bring this up because in Oklahoma, there's now an agreement between the state of Oklahoma and the Cherokees, Choctaws, and Chickasaws, at least, that if you are an enrolled member of those tribes, you get a free hunting license. That does not make everybody happy, right? Because other people have to pay for it. The only problem and drawback with this is you can't just pick up a weapon and go out and start blasting anything that moves, right? So there needs to be education of hunting, but once again, just the fact that they have the right to hunt is very, very important, and also the right to fish. We need education about how to prepare these foods. And these are pictures of individuals, you know, who I've met at, you know, these various food things I go to. Neftali Duran, who lives up in Mount Holyoke, he lives in Oaxaca. And here he's making it's just really cool watching him do this. It was just a very simple thing. He made some salsa. He roasted tomatoes and peppers in an oven that's behind him. And then he added sea salt and then used, you know, his little metate thing and ground it up, and voila, he had salsa. Julio Saqui, he is from Belize, and he goes around to a lot of the food summits and he brings cacao seeds and then he shows how he processes it, which of course is how it's a very long process. You don't just eat those things right off the tree. Clayton Brascu, that is his handy dandy corn husker, where you put the corn in at the top and then you grind it and then the kernels go flying off. And then Terrell Dude Johnson, he is Tohono O'odham. And so we were about to make some cholla buds. So it's these people, you know, who are very important, and the number of native chefs are really proliferating too. But they get their knowledge from the tribal elders on how to prepare this stuff. And so this is why it's really important to engage with those people who know how to do it. tribal gardening initiatives, and this is one of Elizabeth's pictures. Your tribe needs to have educational programs about gardening. And this, for example, is a Cheyenne River Youth Project. And we're starting to see more and more gardens, in schools. The problem, of course, is if you don't go to school all summer long, then you kind of lose contact with your garden, which is why it's important to show kids that they can grow things in little pots so that they can bring home that idea with them. We also need to have education about how to garden and how to save seeds. The Cherokee Nation Air Seed Distribution Project, and there's a chapter about that, Indigenous Food Sovereignty. That is a very interesting chapter because you have to be a member of the nation in order to get your packet of seeds. The problem with that is they don't always know where those seeds end up, and they are a little concerned that maybe some of those seeds might be, ending up going to a biotech company. They just don't know. So even if you do have access to your tribe's seeds, you have to be able to protect what grows right out of those seeds from cross-pollination. And that's not always easy if you back right up to a Monsanto farm. So this is one of the great challenges that we have. So what I want to end up with here, I want to make just, another comment, and then if y'all have any questions or comments. Climate change and global warming is affecting everybody. It isn't just us, it's everybody around the world. We've got fires in the West, the Southwest, there's flooding, rising coastal waters, soil damage, and people are starting to migrate more and more. They want to get away from these areas. They don't want to have to live there. But in moving out of harm's way, they are moving into areas where we have our plants and our animals, and we are starting to see a real diminishment of our plants and animals. And if we combine climate change with pesticides, destruction of the natural world, and you have the depletion of animals, plants, insects, marine life, and water shortages, then where does that leave us? We have to hustle to find our pre-contact foods. It makes it more difficult for us to grow things and to raise animals. And plants and animals actually are moving northward now. There are some studies that are being done that animals are pushing farther and farther north, but so are plants. And the reason that plants are doing it is the animals eat the plants, and then as the animals move, they drop the seeds. So this is how things are migrating. So I think this younger generation and students, that are listening to this, and you're getting very excited about this movement, we really need to have problem solvers. What are we going to do about all of these issues that we are facing? Because we can't just drop this in the lap of our grandkids or the seventh generation from now. And when you have that attitude that it's not our problem, it's going to be somebody else's, that's where everything's just going to come to a screeching halt. So, but I am still optimistic because of people like you all. So, if y'all have any questions or comments or harsh language you want to, tell me, go right ahead. I'm used to it.
Thank you, Dr. Mihesuah. No, I think our listeners and future students and current students would appreciate the questions that you're posing to all of us. We actually had one come through a little beforehand, like if you could speak to what are the differences between food security, food justice, and Indigenous food sovereignty. Because they're an incoming student and they're, like you said, they're just starting to learn about this. So they're wondering what are some differences between those three.
Okay, I'm just now seeing these questions because my thing took up the whole page. Well, that food sovereignty is complete control of everything that you have, but food security means you just have food. So that means you just have food, any old food. And while some people are happy just to have something to eat, it's not necessarily the most nutritious food. So this would mean people who have to shop at Dollar General, or students who, have to buy ramen noodles, right? So your food's secure because you've got it, but it's not necessarily the best.
Mhm.
And then what was the third? What else did you say?
That was it. They wanted to
Okay.
know the difference between food security, food justice,
Yeah.
and indigenous food sovereignty. Yeah. We also have a question from Cody Hendrickson. He says, Chignik, thank you for your time. I was wondering how you feel about tribes getting involved with modern economies surrounding agriculture, aquaculture, and mariculture that may not have been a traditional food, but show promise for sources of food sovereignty, revenue, and research.
That's a good one. Well, I think anytime you start in on a business, a tribe starts in on a business, you hope that the people that are really going to benefit are the tribal members. And that is not always the case with some tribes. If you are going to start a business, say you're going to start raising bison, but you only sell that meat to outsiders, then who are you helping? One hopes that every aspect of the kind of initiatives that you just mentioned, that the money is funneled back to the tribe. And I would say that closely associated with that question is the topic of people who are chefs and using traditional foods to make money. What happens to our resources if you want to put that stuff on the menu? So the answer is you would hope that the people who are doing that are buying from tribal members so that the tribal members will benefit, that there is enough left for the tribal members, and that you are protecting where you're getting those resources so that they do not become depleted. So yeah, I mean, the long roundabout answer is I think it's great if tribes have those initiatives, like you mentioned, as long as the tribe is benefiting from it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Is that
I think that
an
is something
answer?
Cody has been inquiring about. Yeah, he's a fellow committee member. Um, then also we had someone pose a question about to kind of follow up on some of your statements earlier. How are current Native communities responding both to the past and today with concerns about organizing accomplishments or challenges for establishing or reestablishing food systems?
How are they? I'm sorry, can you say the first part again?
Yeah, they were asking how have Native communities responded, both in the past and today, that would assist in addressing some of those questions that you posed, like how have they organized and what are some of the accomplishments and challenges?
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. A lot of tribes, because their tribal councils are behind these initiatives, and so they really are putting money into it, they're putting resources into it. So a lot of tribes are able to have some real success. So they have farms that are community farms. So their people can come to these farms. It is for them. It is for those people. I think that when the tribes get really, really big and that are very, very acculturated, again, I keep going back to Oklahoma because it is such a great example of so many different things. You've got some people who are 5,000 something degree Cherokee blood. So their concern really isn't with any of the things that we're talking about here. And a lot of the people there in Oklahoma do have a lot of money. So they may be a member of the tribe, but they're not really willing to put any work or effort into it because they don't have to, I guess. I think that you would really have to go tribe by tribe to find out how it is that they are doing. I would point to on the White Mountain Apache Reservation that they have the People's Farm there, and that is growing and getting bigger and more successful. And that is for the people. That's what it's called. It's the People's Farm. And I think the same kind of thing is happening in other places, around the country as well. There are more Native people, I think, going to universities who are starting to become greatly interested in this. And so these are going to be our problem solvers. So keep in mind that we are still in the very early stages of this indigenous food sovereignty movement. You know, it hasn't been around very long. This term indigenous food sovereignty, using indigenous food sovereignty, really didn't even start till 2005, but all this really didn't even take off till maybe 8 to 10 years ago.
Mm.
And every day, you know, I can look online and I can see more initiatives, more websites, more gardens, more programs like what you have here at Humboldt. More universities are starting to incorporate, you know, native thought and traditional ways of knowing. So I think if we ask this question again in a few more years, it'd be bigger and better, hopefully. And hopefully with the new administration coming in, things might be better too.
Um, I think also to follow up on some of the prior discussion, we have a comment here from, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Haliahana Stefitan. And so they say, Agang, thanks for the talk. I think a big strength of Indigenous food sovereignty is the trans-Indigenous applications and knowledge sharing towards collective resistance. On the note of sharing, many Alaska Native tribes have land use permits that anyone outside of specific tribal members on their tribal lands must apply for to hike or gather on their lands. Tribes have the sovereignty to deny these permits to and to follow up with those who apply. Alaska also has some explicitly and continuing subsistence rights and protections processes to protect the natural environment and their access to subsistence foods, which they believe should be included in these NAIS talks about Indigenous food sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
And they also state they think adopting some of these policies to fellow tribal nations would address the need to arrest poachers. And they put in parentheses something that they'll bring up with their own tribe, and that accessing traditional foods will be an additional component of that.
You know, in the early 1800s, after removal, the Cherokee Nation did institute laws to protect its resources. The key is, how are you actually going to implement that? You know, there would be intruders that would come in the middle of the night and cut down their trees and throw them into the Illinois River and push them downstream. So you'd wake up the next morning, it's like, where are my trees? You know, they're gone. So many tribes have always had laws, you know, about protecting their land. You know, again, the White Mountain Apaches, you can't even go hiking, you know, up Mount Baldy, you know, places up there without getting a permit, getting permission. So you're not supposed to really go on tribal land and just start taking what you want, but people do it. So yeah, you know, the question is, how is it, can you manage, especially if you've got a big land base, how is it you patrol the whole area? And then what do you do if you catch somebody?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Here's another question. It's kind of changing gears. They say, you're very knowledgeable about tribal governments and university structures. What thoughts, advice would you give to university staff, faculty, and administration on how they can support Indigenous food sovereignty work?
Well, you know, I can just tell you that shortly after I got to KU in 2005, I was given an acre of land on the West Campus to put in an Indigenous food demonstration food garden. And that fell to the wayside. You know, politics, anybody who's involved in university knows and understands how that works. I would say, because there's so much I could say about this, the short answer is, if you've got tribes nearby, tribes have a lot of power. They have a lot of influence with your universities. And so I would recommend that if you do have local tribes, the tribes can put pressure. You know, if you are at a university where maybe you've got a small coalition of Native students, but there aren't any tribes nearby, it's really, you're sort of at the mercy of the the university administration. But if you're, say, at Flagstaff, where you've got the Navajo and Hopi reservations right next to you, you better listen to the tribes. And I know in California, there's quite a few tribes out there. So if anybody is wanting to start some kind of initiative at your university, you need to find somebody who has an in with your local tribal government so they can help on your behalf. I have discovered just in my experience that that really is one of your best bets, honestly. Either that or you need a heck of a grant writer and you win a that grant and then you can do what you want because all universities love that.
Yeah, that's exactly what our experience has been here at HSU when we started the initiative through a class that was directed by Dr. Baldy. We ended up
Mm-hmm.
receiving a lot of letters of support. And so if anyone wants to learn more about that, our first speaker series talk was about our history and vision. So,
Yes, she is definitely there. She would get that done.
and then just another comment. Someone says that they're very excited to check out your books and what were the most memorable parts of doing the research for your books for covering our ancestors' gardens and or indigenous food sovereignty in the United States.
The reason that I even did Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens in the first place was I had written an article in 2003 or something, and a friend read it and he lost 125 pounds. And he really made a return to his foodways, and he started running again. And that, I think that was really one of the most exciting aspects of it. But what I really have enjoyed doing is digging in. I'm a real library rat. You know, I can find most anything in the archives if I'm looking for it, is really finding these obscure observations about, you know, what tribes ate and how they ate it, because you don't always have somebody knowledgeable in the present to tell you what their ancestors did eat. So oftentimes you have to depend on what outsiders observed. So if you know anything about anthropology, that's not necessarily the most accurate way of learning about Native people. But with food, some of their observations were quite interesting because many of these people had never seen some of these foods before. And so their descriptions of the foods and how the tribes would go out and fish or hunt, and they were so surprised at how successful they were and so astonished at how much they could actually grow. But what they really were amazed about was the medicinal plants. You know, they could identify what all of these different plants could do for you. And so those kinds of things, it's just a revelation. And I wish that more people, you know, knew about it, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. So
Mm-hmm.
you could spend your whole lifetime, you know, looking up this stuff. So hopefully a lot of y'all are going to be writing your theses or dissertations or future books on this.
Those are encouraging words. I think a lot of students have asked alum and others if there are stories of hope or places to go to understand what their next steps are or who to look to. So I do appreciate your comments about like what led to those books. We'd also want to be mindful of your time, and we understand that you want to spend time with your daughter today. And so if there's anything you would like to share further with us before we close, please take the time to do so. Yeah.
Well, you know, I would encourage everybody, you know, if you really are interested in this, the number of resources that are online now are almost overwhelming. Videos showing you how to cook, people gathering, people just walking through a natural area, pointing out all these different plants. There are elders showing you how to prepare foods. We're now finding all these old videos from way back when. They're now being brought forward. There are writing blogs. Um, there are just so many resources, and you can really get lost and spend a heck of a lot of time doing this. But I would really encourage it. This is what you want to do. Really spend the time doing that. And there's so many books out there now. If you haven't looked at indigenous food sovereignty, there is a section on voices at the front. So what Elizabeth and I decided to do, because we couldn't include, you know, somebody from every tribe, we got a roundup of people that are interested and involved in foodways in one way or the other to give us just a little paragraph or page about what is it that drives you? What is it that has made you want to get involved in all of this? And I think some of those testimonies are really good and really inspiring. And there's a lot more where that came from.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely, this food lab that you have, definitely keep working with the local tribes. And if, once COVID, well, it's never going to go away, but once you can start having people, you could have your own food summit there. You could have your own conference. I don't know if you have a publication center there, but, students could start writing short blogs, their food
Mm-hmm.
blogs of their observations and the things they do. There are just so
Yeah.
many things that you can do to keep you excited, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Revitalizing those connections. Yeah.
mhm.
Okay. And if anyone wanted to look up your work, where would you like to direct them to?
Devon Mihesuah published works, honestly, or just go to, my Facebook page, Devon
Okay.
Mihesuah on Facebook. And then there's a thing that takes you to my personal webpage, and it's got all my stuff on there. So,
Okay. Well, thank you again. And many people have expressed their appreciation and your time. And I'm sure they'll be sending you lots of questions too.
yeah, you can do that, but either through, Mihesuah at ku.edu or on Facebook or friend me or, whatever you want to do. So, yeah, there. So that's a good resource of my stuff. But I really want to thank y'all a whole lot for having me, and please stay safe. This COVID is just raging, and I think it's up to every single one of us. We just got to be careful. It's no fun. We don't want to stay inside. We want to go out and things, but
Mm-hmm.
it isn't just about us.
Right,
You know.
right. To
We gotta-
consider others. Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'm sure you really appreciated Dr. Mihesua's talk, and please follow up with any of the links that we've provided in the chat as well. And recall her last comments and questions to post to us for call of action and any direction we can take our studies and our collaborative work. Also, we did put a link in there if you have time to donate to the HSU Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace, and that would mean dollar or more if possible. But really, we're just looking to see how many people are interested in supporting this work for future generations as well. And
Yeah,
yeah.
congratulations. That's cool.
Yeah, and this Monday, as well as all the following Mondays, we'll be continuing to speak about food sovereignty and our cultural workspace. And we have a lot of exciting speakers coming up. So that's every Monday from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank y'all. Be good.
Bye.
Bye.
Awesome. Great job.
Thank you for all of your help in the chat. My finger's on the leave meeting button. I don't know if it's gonna like cut us off right away. Is there anything I can do to further